Okay, this is the ASUS ROG Strix G15, a gaming laptop that has a new AMD Zen 3 mobile processor, the Ryzen 9 5900HX, that has the latest Nvidia mobile GPU, the GeForce RTX 3070, and that has a brand new 165Hz Quad HD IPS panel. And even though the name Strix G15 isn't really new, this is a proper next generation laptop, and there are so many things to get excited about when it comes to this machine. But there are also some things that aren't really as exciting as you might have thought, and before you get ready to spend roughly 2,000 euros or $1,800 for this particular model, let's see what you should realistically expect from this thing. Let's go. This video is brought to you by Corsair and their K60 RGB Pro. This affordable mechanical keyboard comes with Cherry's brand new super smooth Viola switches, a nice aluminum finish, and of course, a bunch of RGB. Check it out using the links in the description below. At first glance, this new G15 does feel very familiar, and it looks very much so like a typical ROG laptop, but the chassis is actually new, and there are several differences between this one and the older G15 models. The first one is that the new G15 is a bit smaller in every way, so it's about a centimeter shorter and a centimeter less deep. It did get a tiny bit thicker as a result, but that difference is too small to even notice. It is still a performance-focused gaming laptop, so it's not the thinnest or the lightest machine of them all, but at 2.3 kilos, it is still light enough to drag it around with you. And keep in mind, that gives you space for that higher power graphics card and of course, for a little bit of RGB as well. The top cover does have a nice layer of aluminum, which looks and feels very nice, but do keep in mind that most of the chassis is still made of plastic. I mean, the quality is quite good, but don't expect a MacBook or a razor blade metal tank kind of experience. Now, the biggest improvement is actually the underside of the laptop, which feels sturdier and looks well ventilated, but I'll talk about that when I get to the performance part later on. Now, in terms of connections, it is pretty much the same story as it was before. You get two 5 gigabit USB ports on the left, as well as a headphone jack. There is nothing on the right side, which is great in my opinion, because it won't interfere with your mouse. And on the back, there is the power connection, a gigabit Ethernet, HDMI, USB 3.2 Gen 2 Type-C port, and another 5 gigabit USB Type-A port, which seems, like a good amount overall. What I really find interesting is that ASUS is focusing on the power delivery as well this time. Their new 240 watt bricks are smaller than before, and I would say even smaller than I've seen on most competing laptops. You also have the option to charge it via the Type-C port with up to 100 watts. Now, 100 watts isn't really enough to game on the go, but it will be plenty for like office use or your school use. And as you will see later in this review, this laptop actually has a very good battery life, but if you do need to be super mobile and you do need a bit more power, you can just use any compact Type-C charger to top it up, and that's it. Now, on the inside, it's pretty much the same as last generation laptops, which is completely fine. There isn't too much flex in the chassis, the keyboard is pretty good and very easy to get used to, and I do appreciate the extra keys at the top for volume or opening the software to quickly change some settings. Now, keyboard can really make or break a laptop experience in my opinion, and I do think that this one just works really well for both gaming and for work. And the touchpad is, okay, I guess. It's a touchpad after all. It is fine for a gaming laptop, and it won't cause any trouble when you do use it every once and never, because I personally cannot do anything without a mouse, but if you need to use it, it's gonna be fine. Now, one thing that's still missing from the inside is the webcam, which I personally don't get. I know this is a gaming laptop and many gamers won't really care, but it is also the year 2021, where many of us need to work from home or study from home. Even my 7-year-old needs a webcam to use Teams for his elementary school. Now, last year, I did give them a pass because no one could have seen all of this coming. But this year, they had plenty of time for this lineup, so I know that some of you don't like webcams for privacy reasons, but I do think that this is a clear downside. But let's get to the good stuff right now, and that is the panel of this thing. And this 1440p 165Hz panel really makes the biggest difference in using this laptop as a daily driver compared to the gaming laptops with fast 1080p screens. Now, just having that high resolution means the screen is visibly sharper than the previous fast gaming panels, and more importantly, you really gain a significant amount of workspace as well. Now, I do know there were gaming laptops with high resolution screens before this one, but those always ran at 60 Hz, while this one has a refresh rate of 165 Hz, so you don't need to choose anymore between speed or space, you just get both. It also feels like a fast screen when you're gaming. It's maybe not at the same level as a proper desktop 1440p gaming monitor, but motion clarity is similar to gaming panels from last generation that were rated at 3 milliseconds, so I would say it's just a good experience overall. Now, the benchmark results aren't that bad either. The color gamut especially is excellent with a full sRGB coverage and 94% DCI-P3 coverage. The factory calibration does oversaturate reds and greens a tiny bit, which makes the colors really pop and looks really nice while gaming, but you should tweak those if you are really serious about photo or video editing. Now, the contrast isn't amazing, but it is fine, and the same goes for the white point and the gamma curve. The maximum brightness seems pretty average at just under 300 nits, so I would say it is going to be fine for anything indoors, but not great for gaming outside in the sunlight, which you shouldn't do anyway. Another really strong point of this laptop is, of course, the new Zen 3 CPU. So this model comes with an 8-core Ryzen 9 5900HX. It runs at around 35 watts typically, but it can be pushed up to 80 watts in some scenarios, depending on your profile settings. And even if you leave it in the default performance mode, which does put it at around 35 watts, the performance is really impressive. In Cinebench 15 and 20, it easily beats Intel's Ultimate i9-10980HK, which uses a lot more power, and it even pulls ahead of the desktop Core i9-9900K from the MSI GT76 Titan. And in a single core test, it basically just, humiliates both. Now, all that raw power doesn't always translate to performance in every test, because if we look at Blender, for example, it only does a little bit better than last-gen AMD CPUs, and Intel's 8 cores are still very competitive as well. But at the end of the day, most of those differences don't really matter that much anyway, and what you should take away from all this is that this G15 has plenty of horsepower for pretty much any task. But if you already have a recent 8-core CPU, you don't instantly need to, throw it out of the window and buy this one. But let's talk about gaming for a second here, because this is where things get a little bit complicated. Now, when looking at laptops, the first 3 games I always test are always the same: The Division 2, Far Cry 5, and Assassin's Creed Odyssey. And with a brand new high-end CPU and Nvidia's latest RTX 3070, I really expected this laptop to pull ahead of the pack by a lot. But it didn't. In Division 2, it did end up near the top, only behind high-power RTX 2080 Max-P units, which is fair, but some RTX 2080 Max-Q and RTX 2070 Max-Q laptops were only a few frames behind. In Far Cry 5, it actually ended up behind some of the RTX 2070s, which kind of seemed a bit odd, and in Assassin's Creed Odyssey, it did perform near the top, but again, some 2070 laptops scored pretty similar here as well. Now, I mean, these numbers are all fine on their own, but it did feel a bit disappointing after seeing how big of a jump desktop RTX cards made. But laptops are a bit more difficult to compare than desktop GPUs as well, because there are a lot of different parts here that are playing a certain role, right? And it can sometimes be difficult to see where the bottleneck is. So I wanted to test a few more games with a different approach this time around, comparing how they perform on this 2021 G15 against my Strix Scar from 2 years ago, which actually had the same €2,000 price and also has a 115 watt GPU, but a 2070 of course. So what did 2 years of CPU and GPU development really give us in terms of game performance? Well, not really much, to be honest. There are clearly improvements across the board, but it really depends on which game you're looking at. So some games show a really big improvement, like Division 2, Doom, Metro Exodus, and Borderlands 3. Other games like Shadow of the Tomb Raider and Assassin's Creed Valhalla show a reasonable improvement. But there are also some games that barely run faster at all, and some older games like Far Cry 5, but also more recent games like Watch Dogs Legion, for example. I cannot really see why, but it just looks like that this RTX 3070 isn't that much faster than its predecessor at 1080p, and some games even seem to struggle to really benefit from the faster AMD CPU over an older 9th gen Intel with fewer cores. Now, since this is the first proper gaming laptop with a 1440p screen, I also wanted to see game performance here because that's kind of the point of this laptop, right? I don't have data to compare it to, but on its own, I would say it looks pretty good. In most heavy AAA titles, you can expect smooth frame rates at high or even ultra settings, and games that support Nvidia's DLSS especially do really well. Now, seeing that this laptop didn't seem that much faster than the previous laptops at 1080p, and that most of these 1440p frame rates aren't that much lower from the 1080p results, it just seems like we're reaching that same point as we have with desktop PCs, where newer and more powerful GPUs mostly make sense if you're also going up in resolution. But the important thing here is the bottom line, and that is that you can have a good Quad HD gaming experience with this laptop as well. When it comes to thermal performance, I think ASUS made very good progress this time around. They told me they would add extra heat pipes to most new models, and that seemed to have paid off. Most gaming laptops in the past would hit around 90 degrees or more, and here in the default performance mode, both CPU and GPU sit much closer to 80 degrees Celsius, which I think is a pretty comfortable temperature. And it's not extremely loud for a laptop either, standing at 47 decibels. In turbo mode, it does get a bit louder, but it still holds up well, stressing both the CPU and the GPU at the same time. And the CPU starts to pull around 53 watts instead of 35. But for a CPU and GPU stress test, 89 degrees and 83 degrees respectively are not bad results at all. ASUS does include a quiet mode as well, which does keep the system a lot quieter by limiting the CPU and the GPU power draw a lot. It stays really cool, but it does hurt your GPU clock, so don't expect to play serious games in this silent mode. It is mostly meant for, work and school use. The reason it performs so well, we can also see on the inside of the laptop. There are plenty of heat pipes, both fans have plenty of exhaust space, and the bottom cover has plenty of ventilation. They also added some small pads to kind of guide the internal airflow, and they are now using liquid metal instead of traditional paste. So it does look like they really took last year's reviewer feedback to heart and made some changes. They also get full points for maintenance and upgradability, because you can easily clean the fans, you can easily replace the battery, you can add a second SSD, replace the Wi-Fi chip that is under the first SSD, and both RAM slots are upgradable as well. Now, another positive thing about the G15 is its battery life. It showed an okay result in the PCMark A test, which by default does enable the Nvidia GPU, something that you also can turn off in the software if you like. However, in the Netflix test, where it relies entirely on the iGPU, it manages to last almost 10 hours, which is a phenomenal result for a gaming laptop. It means that you can literally work on it all day without worrying, and then come home, plug it in, and play. They also put a pretty fast SSD inside, or at least this 1TB model performs really well, and the speakers are actually really good as well. I mean, they're still laptop speakers, so don't get too excited, but they are not cringe like some others, and they offer plenty of volume and a nice sound quality overall for both music and some videos. And that's pretty much it for today. As I said at the start, I think there are so many things to be excited about when it comes to this laptop. The new CPUs are great and capable of doing anything you can do on a good desktop PC. The fact that you can now get fast Quad HD screens is awesome, especially if you like to game and work on your laptop. And the new G15 is just a nicer machine for everyday use than the previous versions, thanks to the much better battery life, thanks to full upgradability, and those little improvements like the Type-C charging option. Now, these things are probably not enough to, make you regret buying a laptop last year, But if you're coming from a laptop that is 3 or 4 years old, things have really changed a lot. Now, I did expect to see a bigger difference in games though, but since these just launched and we've only had them for a few days, it's going to take a few more laptops and some more testing to really figure out if we can squeeze a bit more gaming performance out of this GPU. For now though, this is it and this is what you're getting. So thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this review. If you did, please give me a like and subscribe to Tech Testers to never miss an upload. Bye guys, and see you in the next one.